Welcome to Patscast. I'm Brad Whitaker. The news of Mike Vrabel's firing from the Tennessee Titans has opened up some real possibilities for the New England Patriots. If you haven't heard the news, which I'm sure you have, Vrabel seemingly worked his way out of Tennessee with recent reports these last few weeks, expressing his frustration with the organization, that he doesn't get along with Titans GM Ran Carthon. And there was also a report that came out saying he'd be very open to becoming the next head coach of the New England Patriots. The dominoes are beginning to fall for Vrabel ending up in New England. Now, we know Vrabel has said many positive things about the Patriots. He's a Patriots Hall of Famer. He was inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame this past October during the Bills game and had some very interesting quotes during that ceremony at halftime, saying things like, "Enjoy this place. It's not like this everywhere," which seems like a little bit of a shot at the team he was coaching. It's like the Titans fans must have been like, you're still our coach, right? And he said things like, "Come on, we've got a game to win. I can't be up here that long. You're still the Titans head coach." But it's pretty obvious at this point, Vrabel wants to be the next head coach of the Patriots. And we know Kraft has a great relationship with Vrabel, and this seems like something that is going to happen. It is a logical conclusion, at least the way Robert Kraft operates, and the way Mike Vrabel, at least looking at his situation in Tennessee and the situation he could potentially have in New England, he wants a functional organization, which clearly he did not have in the AFC South division working with the Tennessee Titans. Now, Vrabel is a very similar style coach to Bill Belichick. He's defensive-minded. He instilled a Patriot way type culture in Tennessee. However, the biggest difference between Vrabel and Belichick is Vrabel likely would not ask for complete control of the organization the way Bill's had for the last 20 plus years, and he would be significantly cheaper than Bill Belichick. Belichick demands something around $25 million a year. Vrabel, I'm not sure how much that would be, but I'm guessing half that. John Gruden was making $10 million a year in Vegas, so, maybe it's somewhere in the middle between those numbers. But Robert Kraft could potentially get his organization back that Bill has inherited over the years and taken complete control over, other than on the ownership side. And Vrabel would just be happy to be in New England as the head coach. Yesterday's podcast, you can go back and watch it. I expressed my idea of bringing in outside help for the coaching role. I still hold to that. I think at a certain point, teams have to take a major reset. We've seen the Boston Celtics have to do this, and it's worked out pretty well. Bringing in Brad Stevens, they eventually moved him to GM. We saw the Red Sox do this in the early 2000s, bringing in Theo Epstein. I think he was 29 years old. It was crazy at the time, but that seemed to work out pretty well. You need a fresh start with fresh coaching, fresh GMs, bring in big young minds that know how to modernize an organization. That being said, that is not the way Robert Kraft operates. So I do not think Eric Bieniemy, who is my choice, I don't see that happening. There's Ben Johnson. There's some of these other young offensive-minded head coaches who I think would be a nice relief in New England that we haven't seen before. But Robert Kraft really values relationships, and he certainly values continuity. We certainly know that because last offseason, Kraft said basically that Gerard Mayo is the heir apparent to Bill Belichick, and he was just elevated to, I think, an extension and a higher pay. We don't really know the details of that contract, but the idea was you keep Bill around for another season and then Gerard Mayo inherits the team. However, things changed quite a bit because nobody expected the Patriots to only win 4 games this past season. Belichick still needs something like 14 to pass Don Shula's record. Probably not going to do that in one season in New England. This isn't going to be a 14-3 team like we've seen in the Brady days. It's going to take at least a couple of years for Belichick to get that record. And it's pretty obvious at this point that Bill still wants to coach and he wants to chase that record. So Mayo is still only 37. He doesn't call plays. I know he's kind of the de facto defensive coordinator, but Steve Belichick still calls the plays. And you bring in a guy like Mike Vrabel instead, perhaps you could keep Gerard Mayo in an elevated role, give him the play calling duties on defense, make him the formal defensive coordinator, and maybe he will stick around for another couple of years. Otherwise, DeMarcus Covington has done a heck of a job coaching that defense. Christian Barmore, the reason he had such a great season, everyone attributes to DeMarcus Covington. I think he's the obvious choice. If Steve Belichick doesn't stick around, which I don't think he would if Bill went somewhere else and Vrabel took over. But I think if you lose Gerard Mayo, which you might, teams were interested in him last year, but he decided to stay in New England, he'll certainly get interviews this offseason. And maybe you put Covington at the DC role, and then Vrabel takes over as head coach. Now, on the offensive side of the football, there's also potential for Bill O'Brien to stick around. We saw reports come out that said he was a bit frustrated when he came to New England because he didn't have a lot of control over the offense. I think he got to hire one assistant coach, and Bill made all the calls the rest of the way. You keep him around with more control as the offensive coordinator. We know O'Brien has a great relationship with Mike Vrabel. Josh McDaniels is another possibility. My podcast yesterday came out talking about this report that said Belichick could return with Josh McDaniels. Maybe Belichick goes somewhere else, but McDaniels sticks around. We know he likes New England. His family likes being there. Maybe he follows Belichick wherever he goes, but that is another possibility. Certainly McDaniels did a great job with Mac Jones, and we obviously know what he did with Tom Brady. Bill O'Brien and certainly Matt Patricia couldn't get the same out of Mac Jones. I don't give McDaniels as much credit as other people do. I think he's the best offensive coordinator we've had with the Patriots, obviously. But I think part of the reason Jones struggled is teams had tape on him. They put the defense in the middle of the field, forced him to throw to the sideline, didn't have the arm strength to do it, and that's really the root of his struggles. And he's a bit of a head case when the going gets tough. Now, although Vrabel is a defensive-minded coach, which doesn't excite a lot of people, particularly myself, who wants to see a more offensive, younger, modern guy come in there to be the head coach. He did do a great job in Tennessee, at least early on, delegating some of those offensive duties with no real quarterback. Ryan Tannehill is not an elite quarterback. He's not even top 15, maybe even top 20. But he made the playoffs with Matt LaFleur as offensive coordinator. Of course, LaFleur went to Green Bay, and then Vrabel went with Arthur Smith, who also did a great job at offensive coordinator. They were a playoff team again, and he left for Atlanta, was recently fired. Unfortunately, because of this brain drain in Tennessee on the offensive side, things eventually caught up to the Titans, and they did not have a great offense these last couple of seasons, particularly this last year. I mentioned Arthur Smith. He could be another possibility at offensive coordinator if Vrabel is brought in. So any of those three options could work in New England with a Mike Vrabel head coaching role. You keep Bill O'Brien as the offensive coordinator. You bring in Josh McDaniels. Maybe you can have both. You put McDaniels at the quarterback's coach role, or you make him the assistant head coach. Maybe you make Gerard Mayo the assistant head coach. Maybe that makes him stick around a few more years. Or you go with Arthur Smith, who is a really, really smart offensive coordinator. Still a bit on the conservative side, kind of the old school Patriot way of running things. Not a lot of wide zone type schemes that you see from the Kyle Shanahan type offenses, the Sean McVays. But again, Robert Kraft values continuity. Mike Vrabel going to have three really great options if he does indeed come to New England. And if Robert Kraft does indeed want to move on from Bill Belichick, and I think this seems inevitable to me at this point. Let me know what you think. It's kind of great because you can bring in Mike Vrabel and you don't have to give up any assets or draft compensation to get him. And this also raises the question, what would happen with Bill Belichick? I think the obvious solution right now is the Atlanta Falcons. They seem like an obvious choice for Belichick. Yes, there's the Chargers. The Chargers are probably the second best. If the Dallas Cowboys fizzle out and get knocked out, maybe they move on from Mike McCarthy and Belichick has an opportunity there. It doesn't sound like Washington is a possibility at this point. There is Tennessee, there is Vegas, but that seems a little less likely. But it really is set up well in Atlanta for Bill Belichick to take over. He won't have to scout receivers with the weapons they have at the receiver position and at tight end. Like, that's something Bill doesn't have to worry about. That's been obviously his biggest struggle the last decade in New England. Will not have to worry about that in Atlanta. It's certainly a winnable division, even with a mediocre team. I think Belichick puts them over the top. They get at least a couple more wins with that current roster with Bill Belichick as their head coach, and maybe he makes some moves and they're actually a contender right away. They have state-of-the-art facilities in Atlanta, not just with the stadium, but with the practice facilities. That does seem like something that's important to Bill in the way that he talked about Las Vegas when they went there in the preseason and worked with Josh McDaniels. He called it the Taj Mahal of the NFL. I think Bill Belichick would really appreciate something like that. And look, they still need to work out the quarterback position, but there are options there. As I think I heard Albert Breer say, Russell Wilson does seem like a Bill Belichick project. I would not be surprised if Bill did go to Atlanta, if he were to bring in Russ and try to work that out. I think that would be a good situation. He certainly respects Wilson, and I think the two would work very well together. The really interesting thing here is Robert Kraft also has a great relationship with Falcons owner Arthur Blank. It's possible they could work out a deal for Belichick. That would really be the best case scenario. Now, the Atlanta Falcons have the number 8 overall pick in the draft. And it sounds crazy. I was on X yesterday saying, like, could the Patriots get the number 8 pick? Then they got number 3, number 8. They have options there. They could take a quarterback, a receiver, or Marvin Harrison and get the tackle that they need. Or perhaps they trade up. They could trade both picks and get the number 1 pick and draft Caleb Williams. There's a lot of options there if they were to get the number 8 overall pick from the Falcons. But they may be able to get some draft compensation for Belichick. And there is precedent there. Sean Payton was acquired by the Denver Broncos for a first-round pick last year and a second-round pick in 2024 heading into this offseason. So, look, maybe they just break it off. Robert Kraft fires Belichick. He can negotiate and go wherever he wants. But the best case scenario is they get draft compensation for Bill. And then they don't have to give up anything except for money to bring in a guy like Mike Vrabel or whomever the next head coach may be. That would be a major win. Could you imagine if the Patriots went into the draft with the number 3 and the number 8 overall pick? Like, it's so ideal. And then you have Mike Vrabel, who's probably just happy being the head coach. You bring in an outside GM. I really like Adam Peters in San Francisco. I guess he has a good relationship with Mike Vrabel, worked for the Patriots organization in the past, but would be kind of a new young mind because he understands how organizations operate in the modern NFL to acquire players. They would be a lot more analytics driven. The Patriots have not cared a damn about analytics under Bill Belichick. That's just not something that's important to him. You bring in a guy like Adam Peters, who has that experience in San Francisco, also understands the Patriot way. You pair him with Mike Vrabel, and you give him 2 first-round draft picks. Like, oh my gosh, that would be the best case scenario. Let's hope if the Patriots do want to move on from Belichick that happens, because that would help jumpstart a rebuild. It wouldn't even be much of a rebuild because he's still got that great defense, and then you can address quarterback, receiver, and tackle between those 2 draft picks and free agency, and the Patriots have $70+ million in cap space heading into the offseason. Now the question is, a lot of people are saying Bill Belichick would not go for that. But here's the thing. Just because Bill's under contract does not mean he has all the leverage against Robert Kraft, despite what many people think. Robert Kraft could go to Bill and say, hey, you can stay here for another year as a lame duck head coach while I take your power away. You're no longer the GM. You don't have any say over player personnel anymore. Or you could go to Atlanta, where they will give you complete control of the organization. I've already talked to Arthur Blank. He's willing to do that for you. Bill, you can stay here and do that, or you could just stay in golden handcuffs for a year. I pay you to not work, and then you can go somewhere else heading into 2025. It might force Bill's hand. All right, does he really want to wait out another year not coaching at 72 years old because he doesn't want Atlanta or some other team to give up a draft pick? I don't see that happening. That does seem like a very Bill Belichick thing to do, but you got to cut your losses at that point. If he thinks, all right, I can keep coaching, I can go to this team that's really set up well for me on day one, is going to give me complete control. All it takes is a first-round pick, fine. I'm not happy about it, but you know what, Robert? Deal me to Atlanta, or deal me to Dallas, or deal me to some other team, and go from there. And then you can bring in Vrabel and do whatever you want. It's going to get really interesting. It could happen today. It could happen later this week. It could happen next week. Who knows how it's going to play out? We're going to be here at Pat's Cast to cover it the rest of the way. And if they bring in Mike Vrabel, it's also going to bring in some interesting questions about tampering, with Vrabel sitting in the owner's box with Robert Kraft and Jonathan Kraft at his at the Buffalo game, the game where he was inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. That's probably going to be a story down the road that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Going to be really fun. But the Patriots are in an ideal situation now if they really do want to get Mike Vrabel, because they don't have to give up any draft compensation or any assets to bring him in. And if you can get something from Bill, that is best case scenario. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll be back tomorrow with more coverage, and we'll certainly be here if any big news breaks regarding Bill Belichick's job, regarding the NFL draft, regarding Mike Vrabel. A lot's going to happen. Things are just heating up in New England.